She read the words on the paper. The clockwork crow. Danger. Do not assemble, for the journey is long and the road leads into darkness. So it was some sort of toy, a puzzle. What good was it if you couldn't assemble it? She felt oddly disappointed. That man in the dark coat had been really scared and desperate to keep this safe. But why was a toy so important? Was it a present for his little boy? That might be it, because soon it would be Christmas. She put the paper down and leaned back, closing her eyes and thinking about how Christmas would be at Placid. There was bound to be a huge tray full of shining candles and a goose to eat, plum pudding and maybe oranges, and a present all wrapped in shiny gold paper that Lady Mare would hold out to her. This is for you, Seren, with our love. Inside there would be the sweetest silver chain, with a tiny crescent moon sparkling on the end of it. At the orphanage, Christmas had been very dull. Every year she'd only had a small packet of handkerchiefs embroidered with a curly letter S for a present. The only real Christmas tree she had ever seen had been in the window of a big London shop. Martha had taken her down there one evening, and how they'd glittered and shone, hung with a striped cane of gingerbread. Half asleep, she let herself fall into a lovely dream of dresses and toys, until, with a small blip, as if the gas had run out, the lamp above her went off and she was in complete darkness. Now she could see outside. There was a moon, a thin fingernail over the hills, and it shone on a strange mountainous country. She had never seen such great hills, such deep wooded valleys. The silver light flickered on a waterfall crashing through dark branches. So this was Wales. It looked wild, she thought, a little scary. Brakes hissed. The train began to slow. Hurriedly, Seren gathered all the pieces of the black toy and swept them into the parcel, fumbling with knots, but she had no time to tie them back together properly before the train had rumbled to a halt. And there, outside the window, in white letters on a black iron sign, was the word travel. She grabbed her suitcase and flung open the door. It was bitterly cold. Jumping down, she took the suitcase out and with the parcel under her arm, turned to find the station master. The train huffed and blew a great snort of steam. It began to move off slowly at first, then faster and faster, until for a moment she was completely lost in the smoke, as if a cloud had come down and then enveloped her, or a huge invisible dragon had breathed fire all around her. Then it cleared, the deafening noise died away, and the train was gone. There was no station, just a bare platform under some overhanging trees. Stars shone overhead with frosty brilliance. There was no station master, no waiting room, not even a building. So what could she do with the parcel? Heaving up her suitcase, she hobbled to the fence and through the tiny gate. In the darkness, something wicked. She sensed, rather than saw, a horse, and behind it, the dark shadow of a carriage. Is it? Yes, she peered into the dark. Who's there, please? He got down and came towards her, and she stepped back a little surprised because he was the smallest man she had ever seen. The whip in his hand was nearly as tall as he was. Eye to eye, he looked at her. "I'm Denzel," he said. She glanced around. The night was a silvery silence. Through the bare trees made a soft wish in the breeze, and there were no lights and no sign of anyone else in the dark lane. The small man didn't wait for a reply. He picked up his suitcase and looked into the carriage. "This is far too heavy," he said. "What's in it?" Seren was immediately annoyed. What business was it of his? "My books," she said haughtily. He laughed, a short bark of scorn. "Books? There's plenty of books at the Plaza, and no one to read them either." Opening the door, he thrust the case in, then beckoned her with an impatient hand. "Come on, girl, or it'll be past midnight before we get to our beds." She took a step towards the carriage. The parcel. She took a step towards the carriage. The parcel, but there was no one to leave it with, and besides, she was too cold and tired now to think, so she gave up and climbed the steps into the dark interior, and Denzel fastened the door on her at once. She heard him clamber up, flick the reins and say whoop, and the carriage began to jolt. It was very black in there. She put her hand out and felt the seat. It was soft and well padded, and then her hand touched wool and found a folded blanket. She opened it gratefully and tucked it round her shoulders. It helped, but the carriage smelled of damp and was mould, as if it was never used, and that was surprising. And the roads must be awful, because the jolting swung her from one side to side until she had to hang onto the leather strap by the window. She kept the parcel on her lap. After all, she was responsible for it now. It was a real nuisance, and she was starting to hate it. She wished she'd never even picked up the stupid thing. But there was nothing she could do about that, except try not to think about the thin man in the dark hat, searching desperately for his lost clockwork toy. The carriages rumbled uphill and downhill. Branches brushed against it, brittle twigs snapping against the roof. The jolting made her feel sick. She gritted her teeth and told herself firmly that it was all right, because very soon now there would be the big house, with its blaze of windows and Captain Arthur Jones and Lady Mare waiting on the doorstep for her, maybe with Thomas, though Thomas should already be tucked up in bed. They would take her into a glorious parlour hung with blue satin and hug her and say, "Welcome, Seren, this is your home now." It was a dream. She had dreamed many times in the orphanage, curled up in bed when the room was quiet, only the moon peering in through the window had shared her dream. Now it was really coming true, but her eyes were heavy and she couldn't stop yawning. The coach slowed. The shadow of a great gate swung past her. For a moment she saw a pillar, silver mirror. On the lakeside rose the turrets and gables of an ancient house. Saren stared amazed. It was so much bigger than she'd imagined. It looked like a castle or maybe an asylum for mad people. As the carriage rattled towards it, she saw that ivy covered the roof, and a few bats flitted high above the battlements. But the building was in complete darkness. There were no lights at the windows. It had an empty, ghostly look about it that made her uneasy. The carriage rattled under another archway and into a cobbled yard where the wheels made such a racket it should have woken everyone. But when the carriage stopped, there was a frozen silence until the door was yanked open, and the tiny man stood there looking up at her. "We're here. Get down then." Saren climbed down. He tugged her suitcase after her. "Watch your step. Bit mucky here." In the stone wall of the house was a door. He opened it, and a shaft of moonlight showed her a corridor, stone-flagged and shadowy. The man marched along it, and Saren followed hurriedly to keep up. Why had no one been waiting for her? But of course it was a freezing night. They'd all be inside by some warm fireplace, listening anxiously for the coach. The thought made her feel better, but still there was something wrong about the place. Small oil lamps lit the walls, throwing in massive shadows. The corridors turned right and left, past closed doors. It smelled musty, and the only sound was the shuffling of her feet and Danzel's muttering and puffings. Finally, the small man came to a green-painted door. He turned the handle and let her in. "This is it." Saren stood still in dismay. It was a kitchen, but nothing like the cozy space she had imagined. It was huge and bare. A vast sooty chimney opened in the wall, and the fire that smouldered below was almost out. In a chair next to it, a woman in a dark dress was sewing. But as soon as she saw Saren, she tossed the embroidery aside and stood up. She was very tall. Her face was hard and stern. "So," she said, "you're here at last. Have you any idea how late you are?" Saren bobbed a curtsy, because that was what they told you at the orphanage, but she was really worried now. Surely this couldn't be Lady Mare. The train was late, she muttered. The woman frowned in distaste. She walked right round Saren, looking at her closely. The hem of her dress swished in the dust on the floor. She didn't bend down or even smile. Her gloved hands were clasped together, and her face was narrow, her lips tight, her eyes grey and disapproving. "You will please address me as ma'am. Is that your suitcase? Is that your luggage? It seems a lot for a small girl." "My books are in there, ma'am." "Really? I had no idea you were allowed such things. There are plenty of books here." "So I'm told," Saren growled. "She'll be hungry," Denzel said. "I'm sure she will. Children always are." The tall woman frowned. "My name is Mrs. Villas. I am the housekeeper here." Saren looked around. "I suppose Captain Jones and his family are all in bed." The housekeeper gave Denzel a quick glance. He shrugged and went out. discuss that tomorrow," Mrs. Villas said quickly. "Now eat your supper." She pointed to the table. On the end was a plate of sandwiches. They had been waiting so long that their corners were dry and curled up, and they were only potted meat. But Seren sat and ate them first because she was too hungry to be fussy. She was still hungry when she finished, but it was clear there would be no more. Mrs. Villas poured tea, hot and strong, from a big brown pot. Seren gulped it down even though it scorched her mouth. She wanted to ask a lot more questions, but even before she had finished the tea, Mrs. Villas had whisked the plate and the cup away and was standing over her with a lighted candle. "Come on now, quickly, no dawdling. Stay close to me. This is an old house and it's easy to get lost." Seren looked around. Denzel must have taken her suitcase, but the newspaper parcel lay on a chair. She picked it up. "What is that?" Mrs. Villa demanded. Seren shrugged. She didn't want to say something private. The housekeeper shook her head. "Let me see." She snatched it away and pulled the paper open and looked inside. "What on earth?" "It's a toy." Seren had a sudden idea. "My great-aunt gave it to me." She cast her eyes down sadly. "It's all I have to remind me of her." "It worked." Mrs. Villa snorted, thrust the parcel back at her and pushed her to the door. Stumbling as weary as if she were walking through a dream, Seren followed. The house was enormous. She sleepwalked along dark corridors, up vast flights of stairs, through curtained alcoves, Miss Villas stalking ahead with the candle held lit. She had a dim sense of many rooms, of dark portraits on the walls, of cabinets glimmering with glass and china. The air was so musty, it was hard to believe. It was hard to breathe. Finally, Miss Villas came to white painted corridors and threw a door open. "This is yours. There's water for washing in the jug. Breakfast is at 8. Please don't be late." Then she turned and walked away, taking the light with her. "Good night, Seren." "Good night," Seren said. Mrs. Villas turned, a little surprised, but she said good night. Seren went in and looked around. The room was dim and shadowy, with dark masses of furniture. She dumped the parcel on the table and climbed up onto the bed. It was very high, but yes, it had curtains all around it. She opened them and crawled inside. Instantly, without washing or even taking her coat off, she fell asleep. She almost woke once, deep in the night, thinking she heard the high, sweet note of a bell, silvery and sharp. But it might have been a dream. And that's the end of chapter 2. So thank you very much for listening. I will be doing chapter 3 in another video. So if you enjoyed this one, please let me know.